And welcome to Would You Consider? This is the program where I, Rick Grant, sit down with Mark Dangelo, an actual industry expert, to talk about the topics that probably everyone should be talking about. Today, maybe sound like an obvious one, is artificial intelligence. AI has exploded. We're seeing all kinds of new tools. But in order to find out exactly where we should invest our money or where we should put our development dollars, we need to understand more about what's driving this part of the business. And for that, we'll visit with Mark right after this. Mark, thanks for being with us. As always, it's great talking to you. Now, we've talked about AI before on this program. We're going to talk about it again in the future, I'm sure. But really, this time, I'd like to better understand what are the forces that's driving development today, so we can kind of get an idea of where it's going.
That's exactly right. There are multiple forces driving this. And I think first and foremost, you've got to look at the industry. Industry competitors, industry models are all about, right now, especially when it comes to AI, the fear of missing out, or FOMO. And so oftentimes we're still using a system level type of thinking that if we put an application in, or we put in a mobile app, that it's going to drive us, our capabilities. AI is going to be so much better because our competitors are doing it. We have to make rapid decisions. But yet, when we look at the consumer, we look at the differential, the other three parts of this AI driving world, is the consumer is changing. They are getting more and more comfortable with managing their own data. And then we've got the ecosystem as kind of the third pillar of here. And so what we've seen on this is that industries are trying to adapt to AI, which is generating new ideas, new solutions. I always use the one analogy that how many applications are written to ChatGPT, which is one of the leading generative AIs by open source and Microsoft in the market today. How many are introduced every week? Over 24 different applications are introduced every week since the first of the year to run on top of ChatGPT to do something unique, industry value, industry specific, to answer a question. And the consumers are no less enthusiastic of doing this. And when you look at that on the third part of that Venn diagram, or the third part of the triple constraint, is the ecosystem, the data that is out there, the ecosystem that this information participates, the industry trying to solve it, the consumer trying to participate for getting something of value, both from the industry and the consumers, or the ecosystems. It's all transforming. And those that were those organizations, the Oracles, the Amazons of the world, even the Salesforce, they were designed for a different industrial revolution, one that was system focused. And now, since about 2018, 2017, we've really entered this, oftentimes is termed the fourth industrial revolution, or the data revolution. And that's your ecosystem, to say the whole way of how we satisfy a consumer, product, services, capabilities, interactions with that consumer, those are all transforming markedly. And when you bring them all three together, AI is smack in the middle trying to make sense of things. And the problem is that our cultures, our organizations are designed for a different set of performance measures, different set of criteria, different set of solutions, that our consumers are changing because the ecosystem is changing. But the real reality is that the industry model also has to change. And I could point to this, give you some real world cases. Some of the failures of the banks recently have been because they didn't understand how the industry changed. Their business model changed underneath them, and they didn't understand that the consumer and the ecosystem, the other two drivers, were going to basically make them obsolete and send them into the arms of M&A. We could go on to that for a whole new show on itself.
And we may want to, but for now, I want to drive you a little bit deeper, Mark, to talk about those three. And let's start with the industry, right? And so the industry view of AI, what are the drivers there that are causing things in?
The key here is that we are right in the top left corner. There is data as a product. We used to think of system level solutions, but when you come to AI is data driven. That's all it really is. The algorithms are based on the data. And this then, as you kind of go across the chevrons and that value curve, is that, what is the traceability and the auditability of that information? And when you begin to look at from an industry view, yeah, you're seeing a flurry of activity, a flurry of tools, because everybody is back in that FOMO. They don't want to miss out. But at the same time, they've never gone through the legal thresholds, the implications of adopting AI. AI has both a set of principles, why do you do it, the rationale, kind of supporting undertows, and then the implications are, what do you have to do as an industry? And what you see on this chevron are implications, from ethical sourcing to cascading information. We've never had to deal with this. And when you look at this industry type of thing, and I just came back from a conference on the West Coast talking about tax and audit, the future of tax and audit. You know, my question to all the experts, and these were some of the top 12 in the world, we're basically saying, what happens when an AI feeds an AI and the information is either incorrect or marginally incorrect? This synthetic data starts to replicate all across this data supply chain, data as a product. How do you rectify that? Where do you go? And from a regulatory compliance standpoint, which is a great big thing for the industry, how do you make sure that you capture that information, can back into it when you're challenged in a court of law or due diligence? This is a whole new world. So people that think it's a one and done is probably why roughly, in a 12-month period, after you introduce an AI solution, 85% of them fail because
Wow.
of loss or
Wow.
applicability.
Wow. Now, how does that compare and contrast to what consumers are seeing when they look here?
Well, the consumers are actually advocating greater control of their information. So they're not real comfortable with the trust factor, the digital trust factor of these industries, and saying, gee, I want to trust you with my information. You can put it in your central repository. You can keep it. My credit card information and stuff is most common, people are familiar with. But what about your driver's license? What about your insurance information? You want to rent a truck. And with to move your kids or to move across the country for a job, and they want those digital assets in their corporate database, and they want to make sure they're immutable. And what about your tax records? And so the list goes on, and the consumers are changing their mindset to basically say, I want greater control over that. I want you to prove that, yes, I have a validity or I have a valid driver's license, but I don't want you to store that. And the immutability of that information, the consumer control over that information, has actually shifted from the traditional systems, which were all centralized repository, data warehouses, lakes, data marts, all those wonderful things we talk about. And they are now going into a distributed world where less and less of the assets exist within our corporate walls. Roughly only 40 to 35% of all information we use in our decision making for AI comes within our corporate walls. The other vast majority comes from outside. So
Wow.
these are the shifts.
Yeah, and it leads us into a discussion about the ecosystem and how all this data is out there. Right.
And that's really where the change is. And these are four of the components of the ecosystem kind of broken down. What's the organization? What's the data? What's the tech? And then, oh, by the way, the fourth one, which is the emerging one, which is AI. We begin to look at those components and say, okay, there are all these aspects or all these attributions, and we have to begin to align them if we are going to leverage AI to its fullest capability, its positive capability, but also to understand the risk mitigation, the liabilities of that information, and then what can be done to make that. Because if you think about AI from a inclusion standpoint, be it financial, healthcare, whatever industry, AI can make some interesting decisions that are completely wrong. And so we have to be able then to audit that information, audit the algorithms, audit the data that's underneath it, and say, was that correct? And this is where the symbiotic relationship, the coexistence, if you will, from AI to professionals to even standardized workforce, maybe that are using a Boston Scientific robot that has AI capability and they're pipe fitting. Well, you still need a human oftentimes to kind of make sense of what is going on to train those algorithms and those robotic capabilities. This is where AI, this whole next generation of how we work, what type of skills are needed, are going to be comprehensively different. God, I can't speak today. When you go through that, and that's where I think if we go back, if you were to flip up the first Venn diagram and kind of wrap this all back up, if you look at this particular diagram, now we can see that there's no one piece. We used to think it industry. If an industry did it, the consumer would come and the ecosystem would change. That's not the case. You have these competing forces with these arrows, and they're going to push these circles one way or another as time goes on. And oftentimes people call this, if you could see a virtual axis in there, a three-dimensional axis, this is the triple constraint. How do I balance it as an industry? Where do I invest? And oh, by the way, it's not going to be invest one and done. It's going to be something that is continuous, much like continuous quality improvement of the days. AI is going to follow a very similar mindset.
Well, Mark, given all of this, what is it telling you about the most likely outcome for AI in the short term?
I think AI in the short term is going to capture the imagination. People are going to embrace it. They're going to develop to it. Venture capital dollars and private equity dollars are going to pour into this, just like we saw in 2022. It wasn't just generative AI with OpenAI leading the way, ChatGPT. There were 260 other firms that were funded to the total of over $30 billion just in 2022. And where I see this going is not so much a general type of one like ChatGPT. I see industry going into this. And I think you're going to see, we talked about this on prior show, cloud technology. You're going to see industry clouds that are ring fencing industry data and corporate data. And then the AI solutions are going to be then trained against that information. And those are going to be highly secure, highly private type of environments that are under the control of the industry. Now, all that said, the real challenge, I think 50% of the challenge, give or take a few points there, are going to be with the organizations themselves. Can they change their culture? Can they change their modes of operation? Can they adapt their systems and make some hard write-off choices that maybe they bought through an acquisition, maybe they with a vendor, maybe through an M&A? These types of sunk cost are going to get in the way. And if organizations try to languish on those, what they're going to find out with a fast moving AI and the tech and the data is that non-traditional competitors can come in very quickly. And so don't invest that you think, AI was a one and done. It's going to be a legacy system. This is going to be building blocks. This is going to be iterations. And those that are confident in things like agile solutions, this is all about adaptability. So AI is how quick you can pivot, how quick you can stack, and oh, by the way, how quick you can pull some of this stuff out. Because what was working maybe 90, 120, 180 days ago is no longer applicable or working in the market. Those iterations are that quick. Innovation before AI was measured in years. Innovation with AI is now measured in months. So this, and some would argue weeks. So this is the kind of mindset you're getting into, is that the organization, like I said, is going to have such a hard time because the reward systems, the investment decisions, the how do I measure success are completely different. And so all this is going to be a challenge, and there's hours to be said just on how do you even structure your data. What does that mean?
Well, we're going to take up some of those hours in the future, Mark, because we're going to do this some more, because highly complex. In the 20 years I've been writing about technology, I've never seen it move this fast.
This is an inflection point. This is a transformation. This is a watershed, whatever you want to call it. I like to call it a cascading effect, because now it's like a river. It's running to the ocean. And as it gets farther and farther out, the river gets wider, the currents get trickier. And once you get into that big ocean, I think that's the key. And in this case, the ocean is data.
Yeah. Mark, as always, thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And now it's your turn. Would you consider telling us what's happening in your shop about AI, or how you're choosing to invest your development dollars? We'd love to hear from you. In either case, subscribe and stay tuned. We'll see you next time on Would You Consider.